Hello and welcome, it's Chris from Christopher Holt Training. Welcome to this week's whiteboard. Our topic is Lordosis Treatment Exercises, what you need to know. We are going to cover some of the exercises, but we're going to spend most of our time talking about some of the things you need to know, because then what becomes very clear are the exercises and stretches that you need to do. What we're going to talk about first is a little bit on the anatomy, and then we're going to cover the stretches, and then we're going to cover the exercises. But before we get into that, I just want to quickly mention my social media. You've got Christopher Holt on Twitter, you've got Christopher Holt Training on Facebook, and you've got Christopher Holt on Instagram. So if you want to come along to any of those, please do like and follow. There's more content like this on all of those channels, so whichever one suits you best, it'd be great to have you there. Alternatively, you can come to this link. If you're on YouTube, it will be in the description below. If you're at the blog, there will be a link to it within the blog, and you'll be able to download the 4 best stretches for exercise, the 4 best stretches for lordosis. But what they are is they're put together in a 14-day mini workout, and you also get 2 follow-up videos, which I'll be explaining more about as we go through this this vlog or this tutorial. So what we're going to talk about first is some basic principles that you need to understand with regards to lordosis and the exercises and stretches that are involved in it. Basically, you want them to do 2 things. Number 1 is flatten the lumbar curve, and number 2 is level the hips. So as you can see here, this is the normal curve of the spine, and this is the exaggerated curve of the spine. So what we're looking to do is take this and turn it into this. Now, what we generally find is the abdomen pokes out and the buttocks poke out. So again, what we want to be doing is flattening the abdominals and, in a sense, flattening the buttocks ever so slightly. And we're going to talk about how those are done as we go through. Now, what comes along with that is an anterior pelvic tilt. So as you get the lordotic curve, you also get a pelvis that is tilted forwards ever so slightly. So that basically means the front goes down and the back of the pelvis comes up. So as you can see here, through these 2 bony landmarks, which is essentially the ASIS, now you don't have to know what that is, but that's what it's called, and the PSIS, here and here, they're relatively level. They're not completely level, but they're relatively level. In an anterior pelvic tilt, as you can see, there's a much steeper curve there. So what we want to be doing is basically pulling that down and lifting that up. And that's what we do with our exercises and our stretches. Now, there are other blogs that I've done which relate to this. The 4 exercises for lordosis treatment, which is another good one, which you can find on my blog, and you can find out how to perform those exercises best. But what we're going to do now is move on to the stretches. When it comes to selecting the right stretches, there are some basic things that you need to know. And it comes down to these 3 points here. First of all, you need to know the tight muscles, because what that helps you know is the stretches for those tight muscles. And then you need to know how to get the most out of these stretches. So what we've got is basically 4 muscles that we need to focus on, which is the psoas, the rectus femoris, the iliacus, and the adductors. Now, you don't really need to know why they are called that. You don't really need to memorize the names of those. But if you want to look up and investigate a little bit further, those are the 4 muscles that we want to be focusing on. Now, those 4 muscles are covered in these 3 stretches. So the adductors go up the inside of the leg. So as we bring this heel away from this knee here, you start to stretch your abductors up the inside of your leg. The rectus femoris is this stretch here. So let's just go rectus femoris. In fact, if I just put A there. So we've got adductors, rectus femoris. Now the rectus femoris joins the front of your pelvis to, well, you can't really see it, but basically it's just below your knee. So it goes right up the middle of the leg from that point to that point. So in order to stretch that, what we want is we want this part static. So we want your pelvis nice and static. And then we basically want to bend your knee. So some people might find that just by lifting your knee ever so slightly off the floor, that it begins to intensify the stretch. What you could do is lift it a little bit higher, which will then again pull this point away from this point, increasing the stretch on the rectus femoris. The final stretch is for the psoas and the iliacus. Now the psoas and the iliacus, the psoas basically joins your 5 lumbar vertebrae down through your pelvis onto the inside of your leg, and your iliacus comes off your pelvis, again goes through and onto the inside of your leg. So what we're looking for this time is we don't need to lift the knee, so we don't need to worry about what the foot's doing. All we need to focus on is moving your pelvis forward whilst maintaining the natural curve of your lumbar spine. And what that will do is that will stretch these 2 muscles. So those are the muscles and those are the stretches. What we then need to do is focus on how to get the most out of these stretches, which is 1, breathing, 2, moving into the stretch, and then perform the stretch in intervals. So what we're focusing on is, first of all, just relaxing the breathing. Relaxing the breathing helps relax the muscles, which allows you to do point number 2, which is move into the stretch. So don't go full stretch from, second 1. Start the stretch, feel the stretch, and then move gently into it, which is what the intervals are for. So what you might do is just move into the stretch. So you might hold that for 30 seconds, 45 seconds, even a minute. You will then come out of the stretch and then go back into the stretch, trying to take it further whilst maintaining the same posture, but just moving into the stretch a little bit further. So you're bringing all these 3 points together. Now, when you go to this link and download the 4 best stretches for lordosis or the 14-day micro workout, you get follow-up videos, or you get the first follow-up video talks you through these 3 points in greater detail. So what you start to do is you start to get more out of the 4 stretches that you're doing. Obviously, there's an extra stretch with these, but you will also get these 3 stretches as well. You'll get taught how to perform them correctly. You'll also get taught how to make them slightly easier, but also how to make them slightly harder, and any technique faults that you might need to overcome. So all of that gets explained in the download. And then you get, first of all, the video or the extra tutorial that explains how to get most out of the stretches, and then you get how to get more out of exercises, which is what we're going to talk about in the final slide. Now we know the tight muscles and we know the stretches of how to stretch those tight muscles, we now need to think about their opposing muscles. So basically, we go to the gluteal group and the abdominals. So in the first slide, I talked about the abdominals protruding and the buttocks protruding. So what we need to do is flatten off the abdominals and flatten off the gluteal group. What that will do, that will in turn flatten off the curve of the lumbar spine rather than have the exaggerated curve of the lumbar spine. So these are the 2 groups of muscles that we need to focus on. So we then need to find exercises that activate those muscles. Now, these aren't exercises like sit-up and crunches. These aren't good for our core and they're not good for our back, so we don't want to do them. What we need to think about is just activating the muscles. So you can see that I'm led on the floor here. But what you might find if you're led on the floor, that you have a big gap or a big curve in your lumbar spine between your spine and the floor. So what we need to do is we need to use the floor as our reference point and we need to close that gap. So what we do is we tighten the abdominals, we tighten the gluteal group. That will flatten off the pelvis and flatten off the curve. What that helps us do in our head is learn that movement. Learn what it feels like to be in that movement. Once we've done that movement, we can then come up into a vertical position. Now, the reason we don't come up vertical to start with is because our muscles react differently when we're vertical to when we are led on the floor. In here, they're very relaxed. Here, they start to become more active, which is harder for us to be able to engage those muscles. So what we do is we come up into this vertical position, we tighten the abdominals, we tighten the gluteal group, doing exactly the same as we did before, flattening the lumbar curve and leveling off the pelvis. Now, when we're up on 2 knees, what we're doing is we're activating both gluteal groups together. What we then do to make it a little bit harder again is we then come up onto 1 knee. So what we start doing is we just work on this side, and then when we swap the legs over, we then just work on the other side. But what we still do is we still activate the abdominals and we activate the obliques, which run to their side. So we still activate these muscles to flatten off the abdominals, and then we activate here to be able to activate the gluteal group and flatten off the pelvis. So all the way through these lordosis treatment exercises, we're applying the principle that we want to flatten the abdominals, activate the gluteal group, so we flatten off the lumbar curve and flatten off our pelvis, reducing lordosis along the way. What we now know are the stretches that we need to do to be able to loosen and free up the ability for us to do that, and also the exercises that once we've loosened the muscles can put it in that position, and then we just need to go about doing that. Now, if you go to this link here, as I've mentioned before, you can get the 4 best stretches for lordosis. What you'll also get is 2 tutorials, one covering how to get the most out of the exercise, how to get the most out of the stretches, and how to get the most out of these exercises as well. So you can go there and you can start building your program. What comes then after is the full 12-week program, which when you're ready for, you can enroll in, and then you get a more specific program over the period of 12 weeks as well, with the idea of reducing that lumbar curve, correcting your lordosis, and being able to hold a better posture throughout. So hopefully this tutorial has been helpful. Hopefully it's given you some more insight into the stretches and into the exercises that you need to do. So many thanks for watching. My name is Chris from Christopher Holt Training. I'll speak to you in next week's tutorial.